particularly for those of you who have not been here before, we are in the midst of a monthly Big Band All-Star series. All of the big band stars that you can think of, it is our wish and plan to cover each and every month. And today, of course, we're going to talk about the one and only Gene Krupa. For those of you, as well, who have not been to this before, let me tell you the format. We'll be here for just under an hour. I have, because I love to research, about 20 to 25 minutes of researched information concerning Mr. Krupa that I hope some of which will be new to you. And then we'll top it off as we go through with about 15 to 20 minutes of Mr. Krupa in action via some rare clips that it will also be my pleasure to show you. So, let's begin. And Gene Krupa, folks, was known for many things. He was a brilliant musician. He had major drive and determination. He excelled far beyond anyone's expectations, maybe even his own. He had great spirit, and as far as I'm concerned, above all, he had incredible energy. If you think of Gene Krupa playing the drums, he was kind of wild, reckless abandon, so to speak. Take a look at any of the clips I'll be showing you of him this afternoon and just watch him. He's pretty much all over the place. But I would call it a controlled chaos, if you know what I mean. If you could actually see energy, folks, as Gene would play the drums, I believe that you would see sparks and flashes of energy coming out of his every pore. But that's who Gene Krupa was. And the interesting thing is that I believe he channeled all of this fabulous manic energy into his art, into his playing. So let's put it this way. See if you agree with me on this next bit. If you happen to be bored with life and with what you're doing at any given moment, and you stand up before people, and you still believe that you are bored with life, and life isn't fun at all, what do you think the audience who is watching you will get from you? Nothing. Yes, that's a... Sylvia, you're right on track there. Yes, nothing is true. But if you love life, and you love what you're doing, and you love entertaining, and the drums are your passion, what will the audience feel when they see you? All of that and more. That's right. And that latter example was Gene Krupa. So let's find out how the great Gene Krupa actually became the great Gene Krupa. It all started in Chicago. His birth date was January 15th, 1909. Gene was the youngest of, get this folks, 9 children. You were the youngest of 8, and you still have a smile on your face. Good for you. She's spoiled. Gene picked up his first drumstick at the age of 11. His parents, now the last name Krupa, what do you think his parents were? Their heritage. Hungarian, close. Starts with a P. Polish, that's right. So his parents, who were Polish, let him choose any instrument he wanted to play. It was out of a catalog that the choice would have to be made, and the drums just happened to be chosen for one reason, and one reason only, huh? Very good. The cheapest. The drumsticks, yes, that's right. So, he chose them, and while his parents may have told him that it was okay to eventually play the drums, they had a different idea for their youngest child, their son, Gene. Gene's parents were deeply religious, So they wanted him to be a priest. That is right. Gene actually bought into his folks' idea and went to parochial schools and to St. Joseph's College as well. But those sticks, as cheap as they were, kept calling him back. So, after a year, what do you think happened? Yes, that's right. Gene, as you correctly said, took up drumming in full force. After playing with a number of local bands, someone suggested to Krupa that he join the Musicians' Union, something that Gene would have to do if he wanted to be a professional musician. Quote, the guy said, make a roll. That's it. I gave him $50 and I was in the union. Of course, those were Gene's words. Now Gene would jam late into the night with various bands that would happen to be passing through town. Big names such as Mez, anybody know? Morrow. How about Tommy? There you go, Dorsey. Bix. Biderbeck, that's right. Benny, that's right. And Robert Landau. Oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry. It's the wrong talk. I'm sorry. That's next month, that's right. But all of the ones before the last were wonderful opportunities, as you can well imagine, for Gene to own his craft. One of the things that Gene would be most famous for, even at this stage of the game, was already starting to emerge. Even in these early days of his fledgling career, Gene was becoming the very first of something called a drum soloist. A drum soloist. Why, folks, do you think that this particular title was so unique when it came to Gene versus those who were before him? Any guesses? Drum soloist.
Because of his style.
Because of his style. That had something to do with it, yes. But even more specifically, because those drummers in big bands before Gene mostly kept time and were required to let other instruments in the band shine, but not the drums, Gene was the one that changed all of that. So now you see where the title drum soloist might mean a little more here. Now a drummer could also be the star of a swing evening. But why didn't this happen before Gene? It's probably safe to say, folks, that no drummer before Gene in the great big band era had the talent and star quality, that certain energy for people like you to notice people like them on stage. Well, playing all those super local gigs as well was good, but Gene was feeling that it was high time to make it in the big time. Gene Krupa upped and moved to New York City in 1929. Krupa realized that he had better play it safe and start small in the Big Apple. So he'd often find himself, get this, playing in the pits of various Broadway shows. And if you think Krupa was the only one who did that or had that idea, I would say that you're sadly mistaken, because Benny Goodman and Glenn Miller would also find themselves playing in those same Broadway pits, those same Broadway orchestras. So why do you think they did it, folks? Experience, but something even more basic. Exposed to the public, huh?
The drive within.
The drive within, but also they needed to put bread on the table. Now, how much more basic is that, huh? But fortunately for Gene, good times were actually just around the corner. Gene would find himself playing in a very famous band that had a very famous band leader. Huh? Glenn Miller, no? Benny Goodman. Benny Goodman, that's right. What an honor, if you really think about it, it must have been to have been asked by Benny Goodman himself to play in his orchestra. And believe it or not, folks, Gene actually wasn't sure if he would accept that honor of an invitation. Gene loved jazz so much that he wanted to be sure that whatever and wherever he would end up playing, that jazz had to be the main thing and the only thing that he was going to play. Benny Goodman, folks, had to promise, with a capital P, that Krupa would be playing nothing but jazz music in Benny's band. And with that, the deal was signed. This was just, of course, when Benny himself hit it really big, and Gene just happened to be there for the ride. Talk about good timing, huh? Not only did Benny feature Gene in his big band, but he also had something called, and many of you probably know this, the Benny Goodman Trio, and also the Benny Goodman Quartet. And of course, Gene Krupa was the featured drummer and the only drummer in those as well. So, if you really think about it, this was the perfect opportunity for Gene to shine. Why? For two main reasons, actually. You've got an advantage, folks, when you're a drummer in a big band orchestra, say over a horn player. Why? You're the only one. That is right. That is right. As a drummer, as you well said, it is you and only you. Not only that, but as a drummer, you are the rhythm section of the endeavor, which means really that you're one of the key people that holds the whole thing together, number after number, night after night. Think of what a big band orchestra would be without the rhythm section. Really, it's the glue that holds everything together. Needless to say, it also helps when you are a drummer with a caliber of talent that Gene Krupa had. Gene Krupa, I believe, had more talent in one of his pinkies, folks, than 10 other drummers put together, at least in that period of time. It's one thing to talk about talent, of course, but it is another to have you see and experience that talent. So let's do that now in the form of the first clip I'd like to share with you. It is called Young Man with a Beat, and it's basically a drum solo. So give me a second to set that up and we'll be on our way. Well, I'm sure many of you sitting here know about probably the most important concert in Benny Goodman's entire career, and actually the one that not only meant the most to him, but also to many of the people that were fortunate enough to play with him. Does anybody know what specific concert of Benny Goodman I'm talking about?
Carnegie Hall.
Carnegie Hall. The famous Carnegie Hall concert, yes. In all of jazz history, folks, that actually has to be one of the major high points. And for many reasons, really, because a jazz orchestra had never been invited to play in our nation's #1 concert hall, which happens to be Carnegie Hall in New York City. But it was after that particular concert that Benny Goodman and Gene Krupa started to have some differences, artistic and otherwise, that would eventually cause a split in their professional relationship. That Carnegie Hall concert was memorable for other things as well, none more so than the extended, and I mean extended, if you thought this was an extended drum solo, I'm talking about an extended drum solo in a certain number that always was played when there was an important concert like that in Benny's orchestra. Anybody want to guess what that number might be? It's the same word 3 times.
Sing, sing,
there we go, sing, 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 that's right. And if you think of sing, 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 incredible number, right? How about that drum solo too? Amazing, and we will see that soon here. But from that night on, Benny's fans demanded that Gene have an extended drum solo in each and every number that Benny's orchestra would play. So, question. How would you feel, folks, if as a band leader and a soloist, one of your band members absolutely had to have an extended drum solo in each number every night in every gig that you were to perform? So, suffice it to say that Benny may not necessarily have wanted to share the spotlight in that way. And of course, as many things, we'll never know what really happened. But what we do know for sure is that Gene Krupa, left Benny Goodman's franchise to form his own. And here is an example of that. Famous singer. Her name, Anita O'Day. Gotcha. I love it when I can get them. It doesn't happen always, but every once in a while I'm able to wedge one in there. Anita O'Day. Here's a clip called Thanks for the Boogie Ride, featuring Anita O'Day.
I am more than gratified, I am really satisfied, which only goes to prove you don't know until you glide into the boogie ride, how quickly you will glide out of this world. I like riding in jalopies away from motorcycle copies. I like riding just like you do upon the Chattanooga choo-choo. So let me thank you, Gate. Thank you for the boogie ride, it really was great. Music played by solid senders could start me off on dancing benders. When I jitter with my boogie, I love to ride it with the boogie. So let me thank you, Gate. Thank you for the boogie ride, it really was great. ride. Oh, yeah. Here's your boogie ride. Oh, yeah, oh, yeah. Take this. A root and solid to boot. Thanks for the boogie ride. Thank you, thanks for the boogie ride. Thank you, thanks for the boogie ride. Thanks for the boogie ride. Thanks for the boogie ride. It's out of this world.
I love that one. So, that was the Gene Krupa Band. And of course, the Gene Krupa Band, if you might not know, had its debut in April of 1938 at the Marine Ballroom at the Steel Pier in Atlantic City. There were no less than 4,000 people in the audience that night. And what a period of time this was for Gene. In many ways, things, of course, couldn't be better. His band happened to be a smash hit. To give you an idea of how major his band was at the time, he would often have a string section of anywhere between 30 to 40 players. And that's just a string section. So Gene also, at this point in time, authored a very famous book by the name of The Gene Krupa Drum Method. To further capitalize on his extreme popularity, Krupa also established an annual drum competition that had its first airing in 1941. And this would serve Gene well in two major ways. One, it would turn out a winning drummer each and every year, which would help the big band industry as a whole. But how do you think this would help Gene Krupa himself? Any guesses? Financially, yeah, that's really close. It was great public relations for him. It put his name in front of so many people by way of this contest each and every year. Gene, due to his extreme good looks and magnetic personality, would also appear in major motion pictures, such as Some Like It Hot and Beat the Band. But things were really on a high, as you can see, for Gene during this period of time. But sometimes, when you're going through, folks, a period of extreme highs, you also just might find yourself having a period of extreme lows. That is right. And unfortunately, that is what happened to Gene. In the summer of 1943, Gene was arrested in San Francisco in a bogus drug bust and charged with possession of marijuana and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Krupa, because of that, was sentenced for 90 days and ended up serving 84 of those 90. Krupa was later cleared of all charges, but here, in his own words, is what he had to say about that arrest. The arrest, by the way, occurred when Gene's valet, who had been drafted, gave Gene marijuana cigarettes as a going-away present. So, here kind of sets one up for all kinds of trouble, doesn't it? But here actually are Gene's words about that particular incident. And I quote, "By then, I was the glamour boy. 15 camel hair coats, 3 trunks around me all the time, and my valet couldn't think what to get me. Finally, he thought, gee, I'll get Gene some grass. At that time, he goes on to say, California was hot as a pistol. You could park your car for a bottle of beer and get arrested. So he had a rough time getting the stuff. He probably shot his mouth off a little, saying, hey, I'm getting this for the greatest guy in the world, Gene Krupa. Gene decided to leave the marijuana at his hotel. The police, being tipped off, began searching the theater where Gene's band was currently playing. He goes on to say, I suddenly remembered the stuff's at the hotel where they're going next. So I call up my new valet and say, send my laundry out. In one of my coats, you'll find some cigarettes. Throw them down the toilet, please. But the kid puts them in his pocket and the police nail him on the way out, so I get arrested. He goes on to say, the ridiculous thing was that I was such a boozer, I never thought about grass. I'd take grass and it would literally put me to sleep. I was an out-and-out lush. Oh, sure, I was mad, but how long can you stay mad? So long you break out in rashes? Nah. Besides, the shock of the whole thing probably ended up helping me. I might have gone to much worse things. It brought me back to religion. Gene lost his orchestra due to this setback for a while, played with his old friends Benny Goodman and Tommy Dorsey whenever he could. This brings us to another clip. I think you all know the name of it, but it is with the Benny Goodman Trio, and the tune is called The Chic of No Dancing in the Aisles. of the interesting things I find with the clip you just saw is how much the three sound like an entire band or orchestra. Did you feel that too? And why do you think that is? Yes?
Each person was making their own display.
Each person was making their own display, yes. Anything else? Anything else? I think it's also,
The sound.
the number, yes. I think it's also the caliber of talent that the three had, that they were so incredible at what they did that just their talent made them sound like many more too. Fortunately, folks, Krupa would end up reforming his band and be one of the first to incorporate the next sound that was popular after big band.
Violins.
No, a form of music.
Oh. After Big Band.
No, it's two words, both start with a B. Close, not boogie. How about bebop? Bebop, yes. So he would incorporate bebop sounds into the mix. Gene would keep a version of his band, folks, going all the way until 1951, of course, long after the big band movement was over. Gene did, however, dissolve his band, and the question he faced then was, well, what do I do now? That's right. And what would you do if you were Gene Krupa and you decided to dissolve your band? Teach. Yep. He did a number of things. That was certainly one of them. He continued his appearances, but now he would appear as a soloist as well. One of the things he did and was famous for was called drum battle. Drum battle. Anybody know what this was? I'll give you a hint. It was a battle between two incredible drummers, Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich. Buddy Rich. In 1952, Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa would battle it out on their drum sets to the absolute delight of fans world over. A recording was made of these two legends as well. Gene also took a cue from his pal Benny Goodman and formed a quartet. The quartet was extremely successful, so much so that each date they played was totally sold out. Another thing that Gene did with his time, Rudy, was teach. The Krupa Cole Drum School opened in March of 1954. As fast a pace as Gene wanted to continue to maintain professionally, he found that physically he was now starting to have great troubles trying to keep up with himself. His mind wanted to race at 80,000 miles per hour, but his body seemed to want to only move at 5, something that I know no one at this gathering can identify with. Unfortunately as well, severe back problems seemed to plague Gene on a very continual basis as well. Not only that, but Gene would suffer a heart attack in 1960, which all but forced him into early retirement. It wasn't long, though, before Gene got his quartet going again. Not only that, he continued to appear in Benny Goodman's as well. The great Gene Krupa retired in 1967 and said, "I feel too lousy to play, and so I know I must sound lousy." Well, maybe, but do you think this was it for performing for the great Gene Krupa? And if you're thinking no, you're 100% correct. He would come out of retirement and play with his quartet and Benny's quartet one last time. His final performance, folks, was with the Benny Goodman Quartet on August 18th, 1973. Final because Gene Krupa would pass on October 16th, 1973, of a heart attack. He also suffered from leukemia. Gene Krupa was only 64 years of age. I don't know about you, but maybe one of the lessons here is that it's not how long you live, but what you do with the time you have here. It's clear to me, at least, folks, that Gene Krupa squeezed all of the life out of every minute that he had, and then some. In closing, before I show you the final clip, I'd like to say that it's clear that not only was Gene Krupa one of the most influential talents to come along in a long time, but he also was and will always be something that starts with a capital L. Legend. Legend, that's right. How do you know that you are a certified and bona fide legend? Not me, Rudy, I'm talking about Gene, yeah. Well, you have, in his case, to have a movie made about your legend of a life. In 1959, a picture called The Gene Krupa Story was released. Does anybody know who played Gene Krupa in the Gene Krupa story that was released in 1959? Any guesses? Mahalia Jackson. I'm just seeing if they're still with me. That's okay. And by the sound of it, it doesn't really sound like they are, but it actually, folks, was Sal Mineo. Sal Mineo. A very good film available on DVD to this very day. And even though that film wasn't totally true to Gene's amazing life story, the soundtrack was pure gold because, of course, Gene himself recorded it. Gene Krupa liked to keep his private life private. But we do know that he was very well liked by everyone who had the honor of knowing him. He was kind, with a really big heart, and a truly great sense of humor as well. He was a professional to the core and was well aware of what it meant to be a very serious and dedicated artist. Gene knew he was making history with every beat of his drum, and he handled the task wonderfully. If you're wondering a little bit more about his personal life, well, here we go with that. He was married twice, and 2 children were adopted during his second marriage. It's astounding to think that the great Gene Krupa could not read a single note of music, and to make matters even more interesting, he often faked that he could. When Krupa would play with the great Glenn Miller, Miller would literally have to hum the drum part to him so he could play it. Gene also perfected the modern drum set as we know it today. This great and kind-hearted man also inspired millions of people to pick up a drumstick, whether it came from a catalog or not, and make a career out of using it. But most of all, Gene Krupa will always be known for the fact that it was Gene and Gene alone that made the drums a solo instrument. It was the great Buddy Rich that once said these words: Gene was the beginning and end of all jazz drummers. Louis Bellson once said he was a wonderful, kind man and a truly great player. He brought drums to the foreground. He is still a household name. It was the great Mel Torme that said this: the name Gene Krupa, above and over anyone else, will always be synonymous with the word drums. Legends never die, folks. They live on at events such as this and in our hearts right here. So, in closing, I'd like to show you what I promised I would show you. And there's only one number left that I said I would show you that I haven't showed you as of yet. And it's those 3 words that begin with an S. Sing, sing, sing.
Who wrote Sing?
I don't know. I think it may have been Benny Goodman who wrote that. But this is not the typical clip of Benny Goodman's orchestra, featuring Gene Krupa, that you may have seen before. It's not from the Carnegie Hall concert. It's a different clip, and a very rare and unique clip, because not only do you see all of the orchestra members and Benny Goodman as well, but there's a bit of time and concentration paid on the audience that is watching them. In fact, you might even recognize one or two people who are in the audience. One final question for you. Who was that? The great Sid Caesar. The great Sid Caesar.
And that was a very good clip on Benny Goodman.
Yes, I'm glad you enjoyed the clip. It's a very unusual one because it's not the one that's automatically associated with Sing, Sing, Sing and Benny Goodman, actually. So, thank you so much for coming. Hope you enjoyed yourself. Hope you learned some new things. Thank you, everybody.